Today's gospel has always puzzled me. It's the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus is portrayed as a new Moses who goes up the mountain of God and delivers a new law, a new way to live. And today's gospel, called the Beatitudes, begins this statement of the will of God. But look at what's being said. Blessed are those who are hopeless. Happy are you if you're hungry. It's good for you to be grieving. It's a positive sign when people harass and persecute you for the sake of the kingdom of God. And then it goes on, Blessed are the pure of heart. Well, in our culture, aren't we taught to be sophisticated and urbane? The whole of the Sermon on the Mount goes this way. There's hardly a passage in it that does not bring us up short, that does not ask questions of us that are counterintuitive, that leave you scratching your head. Today's second reading from Paul, I think, helps us interpret what's going on in the Sermon on the Mount. There, Paul pushes this unlikely view of things, this upside-down view of the world, to its very limits. He's writing a letter to the church in Corinth, an exceedingly troubled congregation. And it's composed mostly of Jewish background people or Greek background people. And he says to the Jewish background people, what you're interested in is power. You want to see miracles and healings and supernatural fireworks and stunning events. And to the Greek background people, he said, and you're interested in eloquence and fine logic and persuasive arguments, wisdom and power, and yet God considers them foolishness. And then he points to the cross. I reach only Jesus Christ and Him crucified, Paul says. It's in the cross that we see the power and the wisdom of God. But what power is there in it? The cross is a symbol of defeat, of punishment, of loneliness, of pain. And what wisdom is there in it? It looks like nonsense, and yet Paul says, here we see God best in action. In what is counterintuitive, what is not what we would think as being proper and right. What happens in the cross, of course, is that God is acting through Jesus and his death. And he's answering the question, just how serious are you, God, about human beings? How committed are you? How far will you go? Just how much do you love us? And there on the cross comes the answer. I love you to the limit. I love you with all that I have. I sacrifice all that I have. I give everything that I am. It's all yours. That's how much God cares. That is the extent of God's compassion. That's the power and the wisdom of love. Of love. And that idea of commitment, compassion, sacrifice, giving are not the ways of the world, are they? So in these Beatitudes, I think we need to see the embodiment of Jesus himself. When you look at them, you see Jesus. This is who he was. This is the way he acted. And for those of us who have been baptized into Jesus' death and resurrection, this is our way of life. This is who we are called to be. People of compassion, caring, sacrifice, giving, commitment. Who would have guessed? Well, given this, I think there are two things that we need to ponder. First is this: the baptized Christians, the holy ones, the saints, the followers of Jesus are in the world, but not of it. Our citizenship is really elsewhere. Some years back, William Willimon and Stanley Hauerwas wrote a book called Resident Alien. It's a wonderful model for who Christians are. We belong to Jesus. We belong to the reign of God. We belong to this world of compassion and commitment and concern, not of this world. And that means, therefore, that we're always going to be countercultural people. We're always going to be people who are pressing the edge because we bring a cross-like view of things to all of human life. When I was Bishop of Montana, when the legislature met, nearly every meeting contained a bill to do away with the death penalty. Montana still has the death penalty. And I always made it my business to go to the legislative session and testify against death penalty. The last time I did it, I remember working pretty hard on my little 5-minute speech. I talked about how human justice is often ham-fisted and inaccurate. And then I want to talk about what I really know about human beings through Jesus and through his crucifixion. That is, that we are all created in God's image, that every human being is one for whom Jesus died, that there is no human being that is not valuable and unique and important. There are no throwaway people. And even for those who have messed up their lives in a grand way, God cares. And we should too. When it came time for the legislators to talk among themselves, this is all they wanted to speak about. How much does it cost to execute someone, as opposed to the cost of a lifetime of imprisonment? There was no talk about castaway people or human dignity or the sacrifice of Christ or anything like that. It was, how much will it cost? And when they were told by the experts that it's cheaper to put someone in prison than to kill them, they'd said, oh no, that can't possibly be right. Pressing the edge, countercultural. We've had a lot of trouble the last week or so with gun violence, haven't we? What is this? The 29th? Isn't that today, the 29th? Yeah, okay. Now, notice the news report from NPR the other day. In 2023, there have been 40 mass killings in the United States. That is to say, in 29 days, we've had 40 of these events. There are more guns in this country than there are people. Can you imagine that? 335 million guns. Now, I know this is a complicated issue. And there's a difference between someone with an automatic rifle shooting up a street and the person who wants to go out hunting. I understand that. But you need to understand that guns are about power. In Montana, one time, we were I was getting ready to ordain some people to the priesthood, and one of the candidates at that point was a gay person. And this was a controversial issue. And people were a little tense, expecting some possible trouble. I was standing outside the church in the front yard, waiting for things to happen, and someone in the diocese, actually a very prominent person, came up to me and he said, Bishop, don't worry. If something goes wrong, I've got the answer. And he pulled back his coat. There was the gun. Now, by resolution of the General Convention, all Episcopal churches are gun-free zones. But who can possibly imagine that shooting someone in church is a good idea? Countercultural. We belong to a different kingdom. We have a different master. That's one of the implications of the Beatitudes. The other is expect to be surprised. That's the way the risen Lord works. Who expected a resurrection after Good Friday? When I became bishop of Montana, I had served churches only in West Virginia and Ohio. I'd frankly never been to Montana. Didn't particularly want to go there. And then I was elected and I went, and one of the constant questions people would ask me is, how in the world did you get here? The answer is, God called me. That's how I got here. It was a surprise to me. I didn't expect it. One of the churches in Montana had been fussing around for years about stuff, how much everything cost and how hard it was to run a church, and complaining about their priest, etc., etc. There was a particular member of the church whose husband had died suddenly. In fact, the man had been in the circus. He was a circus clown, and he died. And I happened to be there one Sunday for a visitation, and this woman came up to me. She said, you know, I've been thinking about this church and what goes on here. And I think God is calling us to form a community garden, and I'm to be in charge of it. I said something like, go for it, lady. And boy, did she. They blocked out a huge section of the property. They put a fence around it. They plowed it. They planted crops. And much to their surprise, they had an enormous amount of vegetables that year that they gave to the food bank. They opened it up, part of the plot, to the local high school, and the high school kids came in and planted vegetables that they gave to the homeless shelter. The following year, when I went back for a visitation, they could hardly contain themselves. They kept saying, Bishop, come on, look at our garden, look at our garden. Who would have guessed? Who would have guessed? Now, the Cathedral Parish is going through a transition right now. Expect surprises. Things aren't going to be the way they were. Expect that they will be guided by the Lord himself. After all, this is his cathedral. But don't plan to have things be the way they were. Nice and comfortable. We know what's going to happen and who's in charge. Transitions are stressful. They're very stressful for individual people and for organizations. Be aware of that, please, as we go through this. And we're a far enough place that there are beginning to be some strains in the brickwork. People are beginning to talk about the good old days. We used to do. Now, if you're talking that way, that means you're facing the wrong direction. It means you need to face the future. Now, you don't know what the future is going to bring, do you? That makes it uncomfortable. But I'm here to tell you that the risen Lord will be in the future. That's where he dwells. So expect a surprise. He's going to come out and say, go this way, go that way. And you may say, but. That's the way it works. The Sermon on the Mount. We're told that hordes of people came to hear Jesus preach. Wherever he went, he was the center of a swirl of humanity. He attracted people to hear him, to see him heal, just to touch his robe. That's because to be near Jesus is to be, it's to be made whole. It's to be asked to live in a different kind of reality, knowing that that reality is the way of life.